I rubbed my thumb over the dent in my mother's silver thimble until the edge bit my skin. That was how I stood in the servant corridor of the Salvetor estate on my first night, apron strings too tight at my back, listening to laughter roll out from the dining hall like something warm that had never belonged to me. The thimble lived in my right pocket always. My father had called it useless luck. My mother had called it armor. After they were both gone, I kept it because metal was easier to trust than promises. Try not to speak unless spoken to, one of the older maids told me. Her name was Teresa, and she had already decided I would fail at whatever this house required. And don't stare at him. Him, I asked. She gave me a look sharp enough to peel skin. There is only one him here. The tray in my hands was heavy with crystal tumblers and a bottle of amber liquor that cost more than 3 months of my rent in Queens. I had been in the house less than an hour and already knew 3 things. The marble floors held cold like a grudge. The men in black suits by the doors were armed even when they stood perfectly still. And everyone in this house moved around one name without saying it too loudly. Salvetor. I followed Teresa through the swinging door and into a room full of silence dressed as conversation. Long table, dark wood. Smoke caught in the chandelier light. Men seated with the loose stillness of people used to violence and bored by it. Italian moved through the room in low currents, then it stopped all at once. I didn't know why until I felt the gaze. At the head of the table sat Dante Salvetor. He didn't have to raise his voice, didn't have to move. The room shaped itself around him anyway. He wore a black suit with no shine to it, only clean lines and a white shirt open at the throat. His hands were bare on the armrests, not restless, not decorative. Just there like the rest of him, controlled enough to make everyone else look temporary. Teresa dipped her head and set down her tray. I stepped forward with mine. Careful, new girl, a male voice said lazily. I turned too fast. The man who blocked me smiled without warmth. He had a steward's keys at his belt and the kind of face that enjoyed humiliating people who couldn't answer back. Later, I would learn his name was Marcello Ferri. That night, I only knew he looked at me as if I had been hired for him to break in. First night and already shaking, he said. I'm not shaking, I said, a mistake. The men nearest him glanced down. Marcello's smile thinned. He reached out as if to steady the tray, then brought the flat of his hand sharply down over my fingers against the silver rim. Pain shot bright through both hands. The crystal jumped, one tumbler tipped, hit the floor and shattered at Dante Salvetor's feet. A hard, clear sound, then stillness. My breath caught. My fingers had gone numb for half a second, then began to throb in deep pulses. I knew exactly what the backs of my hands looked like. Old yellow bruises from other work, fresh purple swelling blossoming where Marcello had struck me. I stared at the broken glass shining over black marble like ice. I'm sorry, I said. Marcello laughed. Clumsy. No one joined him. I crouched before anyone could stop me. The marble burned cold through my skirt. I began gathering the larger pieces with my napkin, careful not to cut myself, careful not to let the pain in my hands turn me stupid. Leave it, Marcello said sharply. You'll make it worse. There was one long shard near the polished toe of Dante Salvetor's shoe. I looked up for the first time, not at his face, at the shard. Then at his hand, resting loose beside his chair, close enough that if he bent the wrong way, skin would open. There's one by your shoe, I said quietly. The room changed, not with noise. With attention, the kind that lands before a storm breaks. Dante's gaze dropped to my hands, not my face, not my body, my hands. I felt it physically. The pause. The weight of a man realizing something he had not expected to see. The bruises were ugly against my skin, knuckles swollen, fingers marked where working men had taught me not to bruise in visible places. Except visible was exactly what they were now. I should have hidden them. I should have tucked them into my apron and lowered my eyes and performed the right kind of fear. Instead, without really deciding to, I turned my palm upward where I knelt. Not to show him, not to ask, just because the napkin had slipped and there was glass in it and pain in me and I was too tired to pretend either one wasn't there. His eyes lifted to mine. That was the moment I understood why Teresa had said don't stare. He was not beautiful. That would have made him smaller somehow, easier. He was the kind of man who made beauty feel beside the point. Dark eyes, mouth that looked made for silence before cruelty, a stillness so complete it seemed to press the whole room flatter. Who did that? He asked. No one moved. The question was quiet. Which made it worse, Marcello chuckled once. She dropped the tray, boss. Dante did not look at him. That was not my question. The air went thin. I could hear the distant hum of the kitchen refrigerators through 2 doors. One of the armed men near the wall shifted his weight and then went perfectly still again. I should have lied. New girls learned fast, but something in me had already passed the point where lying felt like safety. Marcello hit the tray, I said. Teresa inhaled softly behind me. Marcello's voice sharpened. Watch yourself, Dante stood. He did it without hurry. Chair legs barely whispered against the floor. Every man at the table straightened like a wire had been pulled through the room. He walked toward me, and I hated that I noticed the scent of him before anything else. Cedar, cold air, something darker beneath it, like he had brought the night in on his coat. He stopped in front of me. I stayed kneeling because my legs had forgotten how to work. His fingers closed around my wrist. I flinched. I couldn't help it. His grip loosened instantly, though he didn't let go. He turned my hand over once, looking at the swelling, the split skin at one knuckle, the thin white scars from old needle slips across my fingertips. His thumb hovered over them and did not touch. Bruised before tonight, he said. It wasn't a question. Heat climbed my throat. I wanted my hand back. I wanted not to care that he had noticed what other people saw and called clumsiness. Yes, I said. Something unreadable moved across his face, gone before I could place it. When he finally looked at Marcello, I understood how men could fear a quiet voice more than a shouted one. You struck her in my house. Marcello spread his hands. She's staff. Dante released my wrist and straightened. So are you. Marcello opened his mouth. He never got further. Dante took one step closer and Marcello stepped back. Get out, Dante said. Boss, now. Marcello went pale. You're firing me over a maid. Dante's eyes cut to me once, then back to him. Over my order. There had not been an order until that second. It didn't matter. Everyone in the room knew it anyway. Marcello swallowed. You can't be serious. Dante's expression did not change. Luca, one of the men by the wall, moved forward. Yes. Boss, make sure Ferry understands he is never employed by this house again. Marcello looked from Dante to the men at the wall and finally seemed to understand that employment was not the only thing. He had just lost. He left without another word. No one spoke after that. Dante looked down at me once more. Get up. I stood carefully. My pulse was everywhere. He picked up the shard near his shoe with a folded napkin as if to erase the fact that I had warned him at all. What's your name? He asked. Elena Bellini. His gaze went to the pocket of my apron when the thimble clicked faintly against the tray, then back to me. Little Sparrow, he said, like he was naming a creature he hadn't decided to keep alive. You work this floor now. I stared at him. I was hired for laundry. Not anymore. I didn't ask for no, he said softly. You didn't. He stepped aside. Luca opened the tall black door at the end of the hall. It shut behind me with the slow, heavy certainty of something locking from the outside. The kitchen at 2 a.m. smelled like tomatoes cooked down to sweetness, hot bread, bleach, and panic. Mine, mostly. Rosa Conti stood at the steel counter with her gray hair twisted into a knot so severe it looked architectural. She ran the Salvator household with the same expression saints wore in old paintings right before they judged you. When she had heard what happened in the dining hall, she had said nothing for a full minute. Then she had taken my hands in hers, hissed once through her teeth, and sent for ice. Now she slid a ceramic bowl toward me. Pasta and cream sauce, mushrooms, black pepper. I'm not hungry, I said. You are breathing, Rosa said. That qualifies. I took the bowl because refusing her felt impossible. My hands ached around the heat. Bruises had darkened overnight into rich violet under the skin. I had spent enough years cleaning other people's apartments to know the difference between pity and practical care. Rosa's was the second kind, which somehow hurt more. You should leave, she said, wiping down the counter with short, decisive strokes. Not tonight at dawn, I looked up. I thought I worked this floor now. Her mouth flattened. That is exactly why. The back door swung open before I could answer. A large man in a charcoal suit came in sideways, balancing 3 garment bags, a laptop case, and a container of hard-boiled eggs. He stopped dead when he saw me at the table. Who died? He asked. No one today, Rosa said. He crossed himself. A miracle. Rosa didn't smile. I did, despite myself, he noticed. There, see, I bring joy. This is why the boss keeps me. He keeps you because you know where every gun, passport, and spare car key in New York is, Rosa said. He set the eggs down with exaggerated care. And because my complexion lifts morale. Who are you? I asked. He put a hand to his chest. Nico Ferrero. Logistics, security, occasional diplomat, full-time victim of this woman's butter habits. He pointed accusingly at Rosa. She wants my arteries to close before 35. Rosa looked at me. He is 38, a hard 38. For a second the kitchen felt almost normal, then Nico noticed my hands. His face changed, not fear, not disgust, something gentler and quickly hidden. Ah, he said lightly, so you're the reason Marcello left crying. He wasn't crying, I said. Nico took out one of the eggs and peeled it with unnecessary violence. If a man gets escorted off the property by Luca Serra, I assure you there is moisture involved. Rosa gave him a look. He lowered himself into the chair across from me. The boss wants you upstairs at 8, he said. My stomach tightened. Why? Because when Dante Salvator notices something, it tends to remain noticed. I stared into my bowl. My appetite vanished completely. Rosa set a small plate of bread beside me anyway. Eat. I obeyed because there was something about being ordered by kind women that reached old parts of me. Nico bit into his egg and shuddered. Dry, tragic. Rosa, if I die like this, tell people I fell in battle. I'll tell them you were defeated by lunch, she said. He touched his heart as if wounded. I wanted to laugh. I also wanted to go home. Both things could apparently exist in the same body. What was your normal life? Rosa asked after a moment. The question slipped under my guard because it was asked quietly. I twisted pasta around my fork with care. I worked in a bridal alterations shop on 37th when they had orders. Cleaning offices at night when they didn't. My brother, I stopped. Rosa heard the whole rest of the sentence anyway. You needed more money. Yes, Nico sighed like a priest disappointed by humanity. It is always a man and always money. The kitchen door opened again. Nobody announced him. Nobody needed to. The room shifted before I looked up. Rosa straightened. Nico got to his feet so quickly his chair scraped. Dante Salvetor entered wearing a black shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. No jacket, no tie. He looked somehow more dangerous without the architecture of the suit around him, more real, the kind of real people paid to avoid. His gaze went first to my bowl, then to my hands. Sit, he told Nico. Nico sat. Dante leaned one shoulder against the opposite counter, close enough that I could smell the cold on him again, that dark cedar note threaded with rain. Did Rosa ice them? Yes. Can you work? Yes. Rosa made a displeased sound. Dante ignored it. You can leave, he said. I blinked. What if you think last night obligates you to stay? It does not. The fork paused halfway to my mouth. This somehow I had not expected. Then why move me upstairs? Because someone struck you under my roof. His voice stayed level. I prefer to see what enters my house when I'm cleaning it. I set the fork down carefully. That doesn't sound reassuring. Something almost like approval flickered in Nico's face before he buried it in another egg. Dante's eyes held mine. It wasn't meant to. Silence stretched. Rosa turned back to the stove, giving us a privacy that didn't feel private at all. I need the work, I said. He nodded once as if I had confirmed a figure in a ledger. Then you stay. Rosa gives the orders for the floor. If anyone touches you again, you tell her, or me. You fire everyone who's rude to the staff? No. The honesty of that landed harder than a comfort would have. Then why Marcello? His gaze dropped briefly to the bruises, then back to my face. Because he mistook weakness for permission. The kitchen went so still I could hear pasta water ticking inside the pot. I looked down first, not because I wanted to. Because if I kept looking at him, something in my chest might say something stupid. I'm not weak, I said. I know. My fingers tightened around the spoon. He said it like fact, not encouragement. Not flirtation, that almost made it worse. Nico cleared his throat. Boss, before we all drown in tension, I need final approval on the dock changes and also perhaps public recognition that I have eaten 6 eggs in the line of duty. Dante didn't look away from me. Try 7, Nico muttered a prayer. Dante pushed off the counter. 8 o'clock, wear sleeves. He was nearly to the door when I said, why? He paused. Because they'll stare anyway, he said. They don't get your hands too. Then he left. Nico exhaled dramatically. Well, that was haunting. Rosa finally turned and put more bread on my plate. Eat while it's warm. I stared at the doorway he'd gone through, at the empty air he disturbed. My old life had not vanished in a single loud moment. It had gone quieter than that. It had gone when he told me no one in his house got to own what they looked at, and for some reason, that frightened me more. The first thing I learned about the upper floor was that silence sounded expensive there. The carpet swallowed footsteps. The doors were thick enough to keep secrets on either side. Every surface reflected money without ever becoming soft. Dark polished wood, smoked glass, marble the color of clouded cream. In the mornings, a low current of Italian moved through the halls between men in suits and women in black uniforms, then broke apart the second Dante Salvetor stepped into a room. By the third day I could tell which silence belonged to fear and which belonged to respect. They were not the same. Rosa kept me busy, fresh linens in the west wing. Pressed shirts sent to Dante's dressing room, silver polished in the private dining hall. I did everything with long sleeves buttoned at the wrist and my thimble in my pocket, rubbing the dent when the house made me feel watched, which was often. On Thursday afternoon, Rosa handed me a black suit jacket draped over both forearms like a body. The cuff tore, she said. You can sew, yes. My fingers tightened under the weight of it. Who told you? You hemmed Teresa's apron so neatly she cried about it later. I did not cry, Teresa called from across the laundry room. Rosa ignored her. Can you fix it? I ran my thumb along the inside seam near the sleeve. Fine wool, hand-finished lining. Beautiful work ruined by a jagged rip at the cuff, as if someone had caught it on a nail and yanked too hard. Yes, I said, but not with the house thread. Rosa's brow lifted. Of course not, I almost smiled. Give me 20 minutes. I took the jacket and sewing kit into the small linen room off the hall, where morning light cut across shelves stacked with towels precise as books. It was the closest thing in the house to peace. I sat on the stool, slipped the thimble onto my finger, and threaded the needle with black silk from the emergency kit I kept wrapped in handkerchief cloth. My father had taught me to sew invisible repairs before he taught me algebra. A good seam, he used to say, was an act of mercy. You gave fabric a second life and asked no credit for it. I bent over the cuff and worked. That was how Dante found me. I sensed him before I heard him. The room cooled, or maybe I simply knew his presence well enough by then to invent weather around it. He stood in the doorway, one hand in his pocket, watching the needle move. I did not stab myself, which felt like a victory. Rosa said 10 minutes, he said. It needed 20. His mouth shifted by half a degree, and I held up the cuff. He crossed the room and took the sleeve from me. His hand brushed mine, accidental, brief. My pulse acted as if it had been far more than that. He turned the cuff over once. If he hadn't known where the tear had been, he would not have found it. This is your work, he asked. Yes, he looked again, more carefully this time. Then his gaze caught on the tiny mark I always left on the inner seam of a finished repair, 3 stitches shaped like a bellflower where no one would see unless they went looking. My father's mark. Mine now. Something in Dante's face went utterly still, too still. Where did you learn that stitch? He asked. From my father. What was his name? The question landed too fast to be casual. I swallowed. Gabriel Bellini. He said nothing. The hall behind him hummed once with distant movement, then quieted again. He was a tailor? Dante asked. Yes, Dante handed the jacket back with care that felt deliberate. Don't use that mark again in this house. I blinked. Why? Because I said so. The answer should have angered me. Instead, it made the skin at the back of my neck rise. Before I could press, footsteps hurried toward us. Nico appeared in the doorway holding a tablet, a paper file, and what looked suspiciously like a contraband cannoli. Boss, 2 problems, he said. 1, Brooklyn is being theatrical again. 2, Rosa says if I bring pastry near the silk inventory, she'll kill me personally. His eyes flicked to me, then to the sewing in my hand. Ah, domesticity. Dante turned. What happened in Brooklyn? Nico sobered. A dock foreman got found with his throat cut and a Bratva token in his pocket. The words changed the air, even I could feel it. Dante's expression did not alter, but the room sharpened around him. Stefano, in your office with Luca and Matteo. At the mention of Matteo, I thought of the doctor I had met the day before, a quiet man with tired eyes who had examined my swollen knuckles and warned me, very politely, that staying in Dante's orbit was bad for the nerves. Nico sighed. Also, unrelated but urgent, there is a pigeon on the West Terrace and I refuse to conduct strategy under avian threat. I stared at him. A pigeon? He lowered his voice. Winged rats with dead eyes, don't be deceived by city propaganda. Against my will, a laugh escaped me. Dante looked at me then, not long enough. It was not warmth in his face. But it was something less closed than before. Finish the repairs, he said. Then he left with Nico, whose parting whisper to me was, if I die by bird, tell Rosa I wanted a real dessert. The room emptied. I sat with the jacket in my lap and a strange tightness under my ribs. He knew something when he saw that stitch. I would have sworn it, and whatever it was, it had followed him out of the room like a second shadow. Dante Gabriel Bellini. The name had been sewn into a memory he'd spent years keeping folded shut. Bellflower stitch, invisible repair. The same mark hidden inside the scorched suit jacket he had taken from the warehouse ruins the night Katerina died. He had kept that jacket because it was the only thing left that proved someone had tried to hide documents in the lining before the fire took everything else. And now a maid with bruised hands wore a silver thimble and her father's signature on her seams. He wanted answers. Instead, he found himself remembering the way she had turned her palm upward in front of him, hurt offered like truth, not plea. That was the first dangerous thing. By evening, the whole house felt sharper. Men came and went through the office corridor. Phones rang, stopped, rang again. Rosa sent me with coffee I was not meant to hear discussed over, and I heard enough anyway. Brooklyn, docks, tokens, retaliation. War had not started, not quite, but something was moving toward us. And for the first time since I had entered the house, I understood that the danger there did not stop at the doors. It only put on better clothes. Rain hit the estate that night like a fistful of nails thrown at the windows. By 10, the power had flickered twice. By 11, the house had gone into that strange heightened quiet I was beginning to recognize, the one where armed men pretended everything was normal and servants walked faster without admitting why. I was in the downstairs laundry room sorting pressed shirts when gunfire cracked somewhere beyond the garage wing. Not close, not far enough. The first shot froze me, the second moved me. I dropped the stack of shirts and reached instinctively for the thimble in my pocket, as if metal the size of a thumb joint could stop bullets. The overhead light shivered. Footsteps thundered in the hall. Someone shouted in Italian. Another burst of gunfire answered. Then the door slammed open and Dante Salvetor stepped inside. He pushed it shut behind him with one hand, the other was clamped hard against his side. Blood had already reached his shirt. For one long second, neither of us spoke. Rain battered the high windows. Somewhere outside, an engine screamed and cut out. Dante stood with his back to the door, breathing through his nose, posture still absurdly straight for a man bleeding into his clothes. "It's contained," he said. I stared at his hand. "You're shot. A graze." That might have reassured me if blood were not dripping steadily onto Rose's spotless tile. He pushed away from the door and took 2 steps. The third faltered almost invisibly. I crossed the room before I could think better of it. "Sit down," I said. His eyes dropped to my face. "Alina, sit." Maybe it was the tone, maybe it was the blood loss. Maybe it was simply that there are moments when bodies understand urgency better than power. Whatever it was, he sat on the edge of the long folding table used for linens. I grabbed a clean towel, scissors, and the first aid box Rosa kept above the sink. "You've done this before?" he asked. My father cut himself constantly and considered stitches an insult to his masculinity. That almost looked like amusement in his eyes. Almost. "Take your hand away," I said. He did. The bullet had sliced along his ribs rather than buried itself, but the wound was deep enough to make my stomach tighten. Blood sheeted red over his skin, bright against the dark hair and harder planes of him. I swallowed, set the towel against it, and pressed. His jaw flexed. "Sorry," I said. "Don't apologize for useful things." The room seemed to narrow around the two of us. My hands moved because they had to, cleaning, pressing, wrapping gauze around his torso with far more contact than either of us had chosen cleanly. My knuckles brushed the heat of his skin. His breath shifted once, just once, when I leaned in to secure the bandage. The silence between us went strange, not empty, full. I could hear the rain, his breathing. The faint metallic click when my thimble tapped the scissors handle. His gaze stayed on me so steadily that my hands threatened to stop being hands and become nerves instead. "Who attacked?" I asked, because if I didn't say something I might notice too much. "Bratva shooters at the gate. Are they still here?" "No," the answer should have comforted me. Instead it reminded me what kind of man said no like that. I tied off the bandage and began to step back. His hand caught my wrist, not rough, immediate. I looked up. There was blood on my fingers. On the cuff of my sleeve, a drop near his mouth where he had wiped at something and missed. Without thinking, I reached for the towel again. He let me touch his face. My hand stopped halfway there, and for a second the world narrowed to that distance, the breath between my skin and his, and almost. Then the laundry room door burst open. Nico barreled in with a handgun in one hand and a steel baking tray in the other like an improvised shield. A sodden pigeon feather clung to his shoulder. He stopped dead. Took in Dante on the table, me between his knees, the bandage, the near touch. "Good," he said too brightly. "No one is dead in here. Also, I would like it formally recorded that I neutralized a window threat." Dante did not release my wrist. "A what?" Nico pointed to the feather as if it explained everything. "Pigeon infiltration during active gunfire, frankly unfair." I made a noise I could not call a laugh only because my pulse was still in too many places. Nico's gaze dropped to the blood and sharpened. "Matteo is in the study. Rosa is barricading the kitchen with enough force to invade a small country. Also Luca has Marcello." Dante's expression changed. "Alive?" he asked. For the moment, I looked between them. "Marcello," Nico grimaced. "Our departed steward has apparently been passing schedules to Vittorio Caruso, who passed them to our Russian friends." "Very collaborative of him," Fast Mystery answered, so fast it made me sway a little. Marcello had not just humiliated staff because he could, he had used the house because men like him always did. Dante let go of my wrist and stood. I hated how immediately the room missed his weight. "You're not going anywhere like that," I said. His eyes came back to me. "Watch me," I surprised both of us by stepping closer. "You'll tear the bandage." A beat, then another. He looked at me the way men look at locked doors they are considering breaking. And then he stopped himself. His hand rose, not to my face but to the loose strand of hair stuck to my cheek with sweat. He hooked it gently behind my ear, fingers brushing skin once. A smaller touch than the moment deserved, a worse one. "Stay with Rosa, little sparrow," he said. The nickname had changed by a degree so slight I could have imagined it. Nico cleared his throat. "While the atmosphere here is catastrophic for my cardiovascular health. May I note that Luca is downstairs with a traitor and our doctor is yelling for the patient who insists he's fine." Dante turned toward the door. "Nico, yes, if a pigeon gets into the house again, shoot around it." Nico looked wounded. "The mercy I am forced to show wildlife in this family." Dante left. Nico followed, muttering something about cholesterol and martyrdom. I stood in the blood-bright quiet of the laundry room and pressed my shaking hands to the edge of the table until the steel bit cold into my palms. Tenderness had no right to appear in a room like that. It had anyway. After the shooting, the house forgot how to sleep. Men rotated through the night in hard-soled shoes and low voices. Rosa kept coffee going in industrial quantities. Matteo Greco stitched Dante's side properly in the study while I stood in the doorway holding clean towels and trying not to look like someone who had already seen too much to go back to ignorance. Matteo noticed, of course. He noticed everything. On the second morning after the attack, he found me in the pantry wrapping ice in cloth for my hands. The swelling had gone down, but the bruises remained, less tender, more humiliating somehow. "You should not still be here," he said. He leaned against the shelf beside sacks of imported flour, jacket off, sleeves pushed up. He looked younger without the doctor's black bag in his hand and sadder when he smiled. "That seems to be a popular opinion," I said. "It should concern you that I am among the people holding it. You work for him." "I love him," Matteo corrected quietly. "That's different." The honesty in that made me still. It also made me trust him a little, which in that house felt like a dangerous hobby. "He doesn't frighten you?" I asked. Matteo considered. "He should." That wasn't an answer. It was the most accurate one. Before I could say more, Rosa called for me from the hall. I carried the ice out, and with it went any chance of a simpler life. That afternoon, Dante's black overcoat arrived from the tailor's room, damp at the hem from the rain and torn open along the inside lining. Rosa handed it to me because apparently I had become the household's unofficial repairer of damaged things. "Fix it before dinner," she said. I took it to the linen room with my kit and a fresh spool of silk thread. The coat was finer than the jacket, heavy wool handset lining, beautiful inside construction. My father would have admired it and then insulted whoever had done the sleeve pitch. I slid the thimble onto my finger and turned the coat inside out. That was when I found the second seam. Not factory, not tailoring, hidden. My pulse changed. Whoever had stitched it in had known exactly how to bury a message in cloth, tiny pressure points, bellflower anchors at either end. My father's work. For a second the room seemed to tilt. I looked toward the door, empty, quiet. Then I took my seam ripper and opened the hidden line one breath at a time. Paper came out in a folded strip no wider than my palm, wrapped in waxed linen to survive weather. Numbers, payments, dock dates, initials. One name repeated so often it stopped being ink and became a threat: Vittorio Caruso. At the bottom, in my father's hand so familiar I almost heard his voice, were three words in Italian: "If found, run." My chest went cold. The door opened behind me. I wheeled around, shoving the paper into my sleeve on instinct so old it frightened me. Dante stood there. His gaze went from my face to the opened lining in my lap. Then to the hand I had hidden behind me. "Show me," he said. I should have lied. Instead, for the second time in his house, I gave him truth because I was too overwhelmed to build anything else. I held out the folded strip. He crossed the room and took it. As he read, something in him sealed shut and sharpened at the same time. "You knew," I said. "Not enough. My father put this in your coat." "Yes, why?" His eyes lifted. "Because your father worked one job for my family 15 years ago and realized too late what he was carrying." "What job?" He folded the paper once precisely. "Not now." Anger flared through the fear. "You don't get to decide." "I do." Not loud, final. Then his gaze dropped to my face, softer by a fraction. "And if you have a brother, Alina, this is when you tell me who owns his debt." The room went silent in my bones. "How do you know about Paolo?" "Because you send half your wages to a collection office in Red Hook under a false name." He held my stare. "And because if someone can use your family against you, I need to know before they try." I sat back on the stool because my knees had stopped cooperating. "My brother gambled," I said. "After my father died, it got bad. I kept paying because if I did," my throat tightened. "He swore he'd fix it. He never fixes anything." Dante said nothing. "That look means you're judging him," I muttered. "That look means I'm deciding whether he's a liability or bait." The bluntness of it stung. I hated that part of me understood. "He's my brother, I know." I laughed once without humor. "You keep saying that as if it helps." His gaze dropped to the hidden seam. "Your father used Bellini stitching to hide evidence in one of my coats. That means he trusted no safe in this city more than cloth." A pause. "It also means he knew the people around me were compromised." "You think someone in your inner circle is betraying you?" "I know someone is." The words sat between us like another armed man in the room. I looked at the coat again. At the seam. At the tiny bellflower anchors my father had stitched in a house he had never lived to explain to me. "He told me once," I said slowly, "that the best place to hide the truth is where powerful men think only women work." Something changed in Dante's face then. Not surprise, recognition. What? I asked. He exhaled through his nose. Nothing useful. I should have left it. I didn't. That's a lie. His eyes met mine, dark and unreadable. Yes, and almost lived there too. Something like confession, something like him stepping toward it and stopping. Then Rosa called from the hallway again, this time with enough urgency to break whatever that moment had been. Dante folded the strip and handed it back to me. Keep it on you. Tell no one, you trust me with it. No, he said, I trust your father's stitching. It should not have warmed me, it did. He turned to leave, then stopped when the light hit the tray beside my sewing kit. On it sat a small tart I had made before dawn because I hadn't been able to sleep. Burnt sugar top, bitter chocolate base, soft pear in the middle. The kind of thing my mother used to invent when she was afraid of bad news arriving by phone. What's that? He asked. I looked down. Nothing, it's on my tray. Heat rose in my face. A tart, he waited. Charred sugar shell, I said reluctantly, soft underneath. It collapses if you press the center. He looked at the dessert, then at me. I wished instantly I had said less, but it was too late. The metaphor sat between us whether I named it or not. Dinner, Rosa called again. Dante's gaze lingered 1 second longer than it should have. Eat something too, little sparrow. Then he left me alone with my father's secret in my sleeve and the growing certainty that the most dangerous thing in that house was not what men did with guns. It was what they chose not to say. I tucked the strip of paper into the hem of my sleeve with 3 fast stitches before I went to dinner. If Dante noticed the fresh thread, he gave no sign of it. That night the private dining room held only 6 men instead of 12. Lucas Serra stood by the sideboard with his hands clasped behind him, broad as a doorframe and twice as unreadable. Matteo sat near the end of the table, looking like a doctor who had misplaced both his patience and his sleep. Stefano Valli arrived last, silver at his temples, elegant in the old-fashioned way men became when they believed age entitled them to secrets. He smiled at me when I poured wine. You're the new maid, he said. Elena, I answered. He took the glass without touching my hand. Bellini, yes, I knew a Bellini once. Every small hair along my arms lifted. I kept my face still. It's a common name, not in the circles that matter. Dante looked up from the file open at his plate. Stefano, the older man leaned back, only making conversation. No, Dante said quietly. You weren't. Silence spread under the chandelier. The men said nothing, but I felt the fracture line run through the room all the same. One of them was moving against him. The paper in my sleeve seemed to heat against my skin. I finished the wine and stepped away. Near the kitchen doors, Nico caught my eye and made a minute. Pained expression at the untouched breadbasket, as if to say all this tension was destroying his ability to digest carbohydrates in peace. It almost steadied me, almost. When dinner ended, Rosa sent me to Dante's office with coffee no one intended to drink. The office door stood ajar. Voices drifted through. Caruso is pushing you to retaliate too quickly, Matteo said. That alone should tell you the move is wrong. He thinks rage makes men sloppy, Luca said. And does it? Stefano asked, a pause. Then Dante, not me. I should have left the tray and gone. Instead, I stood there listening to the soft rain start again against the terrace doors on the far side of the office. The carpet under my shoes was so thick it made me feel I had already disappeared. Bellini's note changes the timeline, Luca said. My breath caught. He never delivered it, Stefano replied. Which means he lost his nerve. Or lost his life, I thought. Dante's voice went colder. Or someone removed him before he could finish. I knocked then because standing there any longer felt like confession. Come, Dante called. I entered. The office smelled of leather, coffee, and the darker edge of his cologne, as if he had taken off his jacket but not the night. Stefano glanced at me once. Matteo's eyes flicked to my sleeve, then away again too quickly to be innocent. Did he know, or only guess? I set the tray down. Dante looked at the coffee, then at me. Stay, the word landed with the weight of habit already forming around it. Stefano rose first. I'll review the doc manifests. Luca followed. Matteo pushed back his chair last, giving me one long, unreadable look before he left. Only Dante and I remained. The office seemed larger without witnesses. The city beyond the terrace doors was all blurred lights and wet black glass. You were listening, Dante said. It wasn't a question. A little, that is a lie. Yes. His mouth moved by that half degree again, not a smile, recognition. I should have been afraid, I was, but fear had stopped being simple in that house. My father, I said, was he killed because of you? Dante did not answer immediately. That was answer enough to make my throat tighten. Because of my world, he said at last. That is not the same thing. It feels like a technicality. It would. I looked at him across the desk. And my brother, he owes money to a company controlled by Caruso. Dante's gaze held mine. Not enough to ruin a man, exactly enough to own one. I sat without being asked because my knees gave up deciding for me. Paolo had always been weak in ways that looked like charm to people who didn't have to clean up after him. I loved him anyway. Love, I had learned, was often only another word for unpaid labor. I can keep paying, I said. No, that one word cut deeper than it should have. You don't get to tell me, I do when the debt is bait. He leaned back in his chair, all dangerous quiet. Listen carefully, Alina. If Caruso knows who you are to Bellini and Bellini hid evidence for my family, then you are no longer adjacent to this problem. You are inside it. The room lost some of its air. He was right, I hated him a little for that. So what happens now? I whispered. His eyes went to my sleeve, to the exact place the hidden paper pressed against the seam. Now, he said, I find out who around me already knew. There it was, not proof, something worse. Suspicion with a face not yet attached, and once spoken, it could not be made smaller again. The assassination attempt came on a Sunday morning dressed as prayer. Rosa had me polishing candlesticks in the estate chapel, because apparently even violent men liked saints nearby when they made decisions. The room sat off the east hall, small and old compared to the rest of the house, with dark carved pews and a stone floor worn hollow in front of the altar by generations of knees. Beeswax and incense hung in the air. Rain light filtered through the stained glass and painted red across my sleeves. I was standing on the second pew to reach the brass cross when the first scream split the corridor outside. Not a woman's scream, a man's, short, cut off, then the gunfire started. I ducked on instinct, losing my balance. The candlestick crashed to the floor, heavy footsteps thundered past the chapel door, someone shouted in Italian, another voice answered from much too close. The handle moved, I dropped behind the pew as the door burst inward. The man who entered wore a house security suit and carried a silenced pistol. Blood ran from a slice over one eyebrow. He kicked the door shut behind him and scanned the room. Not ours then. My hand closed around the dented silver thimble in my pocket so hard it hurt. He started toward the altar. A shot cracked from the hallway. The wood near the man's shoulder exploded. He spun, fired twice toward the door, and Dante came through it anyway. He did not shout, did not slow. He crossed the room with terrifying efficiency, one shot from his own gun punching through the attacker's chest before I had fully stood. The man hit the stone aisle hard enough to shake the pew. Silence came down in pieces. I was breathing too fast. The chapel smelled suddenly of hot metal and candle smoke and blood. Dante turned, found me behind the pew, and in 2 strides was there. Are you hit? No, he put one hand under my jaw, checking. His thumb brushed my throat once. Look at me. I did. His pupils were blown wide, not fear. Adrenaline so tightly leashed it looked colder than panic. Can you walk? Yes. Another shout sounded from outside, then Luca's voice cutting through it. Dante holstered the gun, reached for me, then stopped himself. His hand hovered by my waist, not touching, and almost, I hated that I noticed. I hated more that I wanted the touch anyway. Stay behind me, he said. He moved us out into the corridor with his body between mine and every open angle. A second attacker lay near the stairwell, one arm folded wrong beneath him. Nico was farther down the hall, crouched behind an antique cabinet with a gun in one hand and a silver serving dome in the other, like he had once again confused warfare with catering. He saw us and exhaled loudly. Wonderful, everyone I like is alive, mostly. A bullet punched into the wall above him, he flattened. I would like to revise that statement. Dante pushed me into the alcove beside the chapel. Do not move. I'm not furniture. No, he said, eyes never leaving the hall. Furniture listens better. He stepped out to return fire. Luca appeared at the opposite end, calm as winter. Between them the corridor became a narrow machine of violence. 3 shots, a body. The ring of metal skidding over marble. Then quiet, too quiet, my pulse refused to believe it. Nico rose carefully, patted down his suit jacket, and looked at the hole in his sleeve with genuine offense. This was custom. Luca spared him one flat glance. You're welcome. I should have stayed where Dante put me. I didn't. I saw blood on the inside of his cuff and moved before sense caught up. You're bleeding? It's not mine. Your arm. He looked at the streak as if surprised to find it there. Bullet graze again, higher this time near the shoulder. He was about to dismiss it when I took out my handkerchief and pressed it over the line. The whole hall seemed to hold its breath. Dante looked down at my hand on him, then at my face. Little sparrow, he said, quieter now, you have terrible timing. I swallowed. You almost died in a chapel. I think timing stopped mattering. Something cracked in his composure then. Exactly one fraction. Enough to make my knees weak in a way that had nothing to do with violence. He took my wrist lightly and pulled me into the chapel, away from the eyes in the corridor. The door remained open, but the alcove of shadow beside the last pew hid us for one impossible second from the rest of the house. I should not do this, he said. He meant say it. Touch me, want me. All of it, I know, I whispered. That was as close to invitation as I knew how to survive. His hand came to my face, rougher than before, like restraint had edges. He waited one beat too long. I could have stepped back, I didn't. The kiss was not hard. That would have been easier. It was careful at first, like he was trying to memorize what he was refusing. Then I made the smallest sound against his mouth, and something in him deepened without turning cruel. Warmth flooded me so quickly it felt like fear with a better lie attached. He drew back first. Always him, his forehead touched mine for one brief, stunned second. In the corridor, Nico's voice floated in. If everyone is done having morally complicated eye contact, we found the driver. Also, I need a doctor and perhaps a priest, mostly for my nerves. I almost laughed. Instead, I opened my eyes. Dante's gaze stayed on my mouth once, then climbed to my bruised hands where they rested against his shirt. I know what I can't stop thinking about, he said quietly. I couldn't speak. The first night, his thumb skimmed the back of my knuckles, almost not touching the fading marks. You were hurt, you didn't hide it, you warned me about the glass anyway. His jaw tightened. No one in my world does that. They perform, they beg, they calculate. You just told the truth. Something in me went painfully still. It should not have mattered so much. It did. A gunshot cracked somewhere on the grounds, distant this time. The house lurched back into crisis. Dante stepped away from me as if it cost him muscle to do it. War S here. I looked at the dead man on the chapel floor, the fallen candle, the red stain spreading toward the stone worn by prayer. The whole house had just been divided into before and after. And there was no prayer left in it that could close that door again. War made the estate feel both fuller and emptier. More guards, more cars in the drive, more phones ringing, doors shutting, men walking too fast. But all the ordinary sounds that made a house had gone thin. No low radio in the kitchen, no laughter from the back stairs. Even Nico complained less, which was how I knew things were bad. For 3 days, Dante barely slept. I saw him in passing, at the end of corridors, in the dining room over maps and manifests. Once on the terrace at 4 in the morning, with rain in his hair and blood on the cuff of his shirt that had not been there at midnight. Each time our eyes met, something tight and unfinished moved between us. Each time he stopped. Restraint could become its own kind of wound if you left it untreated long enough. On the 4th evening, Rosa was teaching me how to inventory the pantry against a siege. Her words, not mine, when the explosion hit the kitchen windows. Glass blew inward with a scream. Heat and noise punched the air out of my lungs. Rosa shoved me down behind the island half a second before shards rained over the marble. For a moment, all I knew was ringing. Then Matteo was there, hauling me up by the elbows, checking my face, my throat, my arms. Rosa, she's alive. His own voice sounded far away. Blood ran from a cut at his hairline. Can you stand? I nodded and nearly fell. Rosa rose from behind the island with blood on her cheek and murder in her eyes. If one more man brings war into my kitchen, I will poison the lot of you myself. Even then, breathless and shaking, I almost smiled. Then I saw Nico on the floor by the pantry door, clutching his calf. My leg, he said with offended disbelief. This is slander. Matteo crouched beside him. Shrapnel. Stop talking. I use humor as a stabilizing force. You use humor because you're terrified, Rosa snapped, pressing a clean towel into his hands. Also true. Outside, gunfire shredded the dusk. Luca appeared in the doorway with a rifle. Cars ready, Matteo, move them. The word hit me like a slap. I'm not leaving, I said. You are, Matteo answered, already pulling me toward the back corridor. This was a message. He won't risk you here tonight. He doesn't own that choice. No, Rosa said, wiping blood from her jaw with the back of her wrist. But he will make it anyway, and for once I agree with him. The safe exit arrived so suddenly I almost didn't recognize it for what it was. Matteo shoved passports and a train ticket envelope into my numb hands as he got us into the service car behind the greenhouse wall. Nico, pale and furious, refused morphine on principle and because he said it would make him confess love to Rosa in front of witnesses. Rosa called him an idiot and got in beside him anyway. Boston first, Matteo said, then Florence if you still want it. Your aunt confirmed she'll take you. Florence. The word opened a hurt I had kept folded flat, my mother's sister. A tiny apartment above a fabric shop. A life where thread and sunlight and ordinary bills were the only things that asked anything of me. Dante had arranged this. He must have. Not because he wanted me gone, because he wanted me alive. That should have made leaving easier. It didn't. The car sped through the lower gate under cover of gunfire from the west wall. I looked back once and saw the estate lit against the dark like a ship on fire. At Penn Station, chaos felt almost normal. Trains delayed, announcements cracking overhead, wet coats, coffee. Human indifference in blessed, crushing quantities. Matteo kept one hand under my elbow all the way to the platform. You can still change your mind, he said. About leaving, about what leaving means. I stared at the ticket in my hand. Alina Bellini, 8:15 to Boston, one old life cut loose by paper and timing. What happened with my father? I asked. Mateo's face tightened. Not enough time. There never is in that house. He almost smiled, then it vanished. He wasn't killed by accident. That's what I know. Dante learned pieces after the warehouse fire, but not the whole truth. Bellini hid evidence because he thought he could save someone with it. A pause. He was wrong. The train hissed into the station. This was the real exit point, not a threat, not a trap. A clean door held open by men who had decided survival was worth more than what I felt. I could leave, I should leave, then I saw Paolo. He was across the platform near a newspaper kiosk, shoulders hunched in the jacket I had mended twice this winter, face pinched with that restless, guilty look I knew too well. And beside him stood Stefano Valli. Neither of them had seen me yet. The world narrowed, train brakes screamed. Matteo followed my gaze and went white. No, he said. Stefano put a hand on my brother's shoulder and steered him toward the far exit. My brother looked terrified, not captive, terrified bait. If I got on the train, Stefano would walk Paolo straight back to Caruso, or use him to get to Dante, or both. I understood it all at once with a clarity so violent it felt like nausea. Alina, Matteo said, gripping my arm hard, do not do this. I thought of Florence, of sunlight on fabric, of not waking every morning already braced. Then I thought of Rosa bleeding in her kitchen. Nico making jokes with shrapnel in his leg. Dante kissing me in a chapel and stopping because I mattered more than what he wanted. I thought of my father's note, if found run, I had run. The trouble was that I had finally learned where. I handed Matteo the ticket. His eyes closed briefly in grief or frustration, maybe both. If you go back, he said, the person you were before this does not come with you. I know, that was the cost, not innocence, something adjacent to it. The old belief that goodness and distance were the same thing. I turned and walked away from the train with open eyes, back toward the darkness. By the time Stefano realized I had seen him, I was already moving, and I did not stop. I made the mistake in the first 10 minutes. It was the kind of mistake women make when love and family wear similar masks, and you are too tired to tell them apart. Paolo saw me pushing through the station crowd and his whole face broke open with relief. Lena, I grabbed his wrist. Don't say my name. Stefano was already turning. His surprise lasted less than a second. Then it was gone under something older and colder. Alina, he said smoothly, as if we had arranged to meet under fluorescent lights and late trains. You shouldn't be here. No, I said, he shouldn't. I pulled Paolo behind me. He came easily, too easily. His hand was shaking. I didn't tell them anything, he blurted. I swear they said if I came tonight they'd clear the debt. My stomach turned. Of course this was how men like Stefano worked. They never needed brilliance when desperation would do. Matteo had followed us off the platform. I heard him behind me, already calling Luca, already telling someone not to let the station exits close. Stefano sighed like a disappointed uncle. This could have been graceful. Were you ever going to let him go? I asked. His eyes flicked to Paolo, then back to me. That depended on whether you boarded the train. There it was. Not betrayal suspected, betrayal breathing. Paolo made a broken sound. Lena, be quiet, I snapped and immediately hated myself for the fear on his face. Too late, everything had arrived too late. The first of Stefano's men stepped out of the crowd near the kiosk, another from the stairwell. Ordinary coats, ordinary hands, guns hidden in ordinary lives. Matteo moved in front of us. Get behind me, Stefano's mouth tightened. Doctor, don't. Gunfire in a train station does not sound cinematic, it sounds wrong, muffled and huge at once. People screamed, bodies dropped. Coffee hit the floor. Matteo shoved me down as the first shot cracked and then staggered, hands slamming to his side. Matteo, run, he bit out. I didn't, that was the second mistake. Paolo tore free and bolted toward the service corridor. One of Stefano's men went after him. Another reached for me. I drove my thimbled fist straight into his mouth. Pain exploded through my hand, but he swore and reeled back bleeding. I ran. The service corridor smelled of bleach and hot wires. Paolo was ahead of me, slipping on wet concrete, crying in short, angry breaths like a child trying not to. Matteo shouted my name behind us. Then another shot. Then Luca's voice very far away and getting farther. A hand closed over my elbow, not Paolo's, stronger, Stefano. He dragged me through a maintenance door and into darkness before I could breathe enough to scream. A van waited in the loading bay with its back doors open. Paolo was already inside, white-faced and shaking. I'm sorry, he said. I looked at him and understood something terrible and simple. He was sorry, but not enough. That was all his kind of love had ever been. They zip-tied my wrists, then my ankles. Stefano took the thimble from my pocket, turning it over once between careful fingers. A sentimental girl, he said, give it back. He smiled without humor. Later, the The van doors slammed shut. I do not know how long we drove. Time changed shape in the dark. My shoulders ached. My wrists burned. Paolo kept whispering apologies until I wanted to scream just to make him stop. What do they want? He asked at last. I laughed once. It came out ugly. You still think you matter enough to be the point? He flinched. When the van finally stopped, they dragged us into an old warehouse smelling of dust, machine oil, and old fabric, garment racks. My father's world, for one dizzy second, memory and terror overlapped so perfectly I thought I might be sick. Stefano saw my face and nodded. Yes. Here, why here? Because irony is wasted on the poor if the rich don't arrange it. I hated him more for that sentence than for anything else. They tied me to a chair near a cutting table scarred by years of blades. Paolo was shoved against a pillar with his hands bound. A single overhead lamp buzzed. In the half-dark behind Stefano, someone stepped forward from the deeper shadow. Vittorio Caruso. He was older than Dante by perhaps 10 years, dark suit immaculate even in the dust, silver threaded through his hair in a way that would have looked distinguished on a kinder man. His face was not cruel, that was the problem. It was intelligent enough to make cruelty look reasonable. Elena Bellini, he said, your father did beautiful work. I swallowed. You murdered him, Vittorio tilted his head. Eventually, but not immediately, and that distinction matters more than you think. The room seemed to shrink around his voice. Slow mystery beginning to open. Dante Salvatore believes I killed his sister in the warehouse fire, Vittorio said. That's only partly true. Dante gave the order to clear the floor. I used the empty space to move goods and burn records. Your father found out too much. The child stayed hidden because she was afraid. By the time anyone understood, fire had decided for all of us. My whole body went cold. He was the mirror, not just of Dante's violence, but of the logic beneath it. Collateral, timing. Necessary losses, the difference between them might be only remorse. Paolo started crying outright. I looked at Stefano. And you helped. His face didn't change. I survived. There it is, Vittorio murmured. The only honest religion. He stepped closer. Dante will come. He won't be able to help himself. When he does, I will make him choose once more between the woman he noticed and the world that made him. I should have stayed on the train. That thought landed hard enough to bruise. Not because I regretted choosing, because my choice had gotten Matteo shot and put all of us here. Dante had every right in the world to hate me for it. When they left us alone under one guard, I tested the zip tie against the chair. No give, then I saw the cutting table. Pinned to it was an upholstery needle, long and slightly bent. I inhaled once, steadying. Paolo, I whispered, cry louder. What? Do it. He stared, then perhaps because at last he understood uselessness had run out, he obeyed. Loud, choking sobs filled the room. The guard rolled his eyes and stepped over to curse at him. I tipped my chair sideways, hit the floor hard enough to see sparks, and dragged my bound wrists across the concrete toward the table leg. Splintered wood bit my skin, my fingers stretched, reached. The needle slid free on the second try. I palmed it just as the guard turned back. By the time he crossed the room, I had already started sawing at the plastic with a seamstress's patience and a thief's prayer. Footsteps sounded outside. Too many, too late. The first thing I cut was my own skin. The upholstery needle slipped and opened the side of my wrist before it bit properly into the zip tie. Warm blood slicked my hand. I clenched my teeth and kept working. Across the room, Paolo had gone quiet. Whether from fear or shame, I didn't know. The guard stalked toward me, suspicion finally catching up to him. I snapped the tie a second before he reached me. He grabbed for my shoulder. I drove the needle into the soft web between his thumb and forefinger. He screamed. I had never stabbed anyone before. The sound will probably live in me forever. He backhanded me hard enough to knock the chair over with me still half bound at the ankles. My cheek hit concrete. Light burst white. Then Paolo rammed the guard from the side with both shoulders in one desperate, clumsy charge. They crashed into the cutting table together. For one stunned second, my useless brother became something else. Useful. I slashed the tie at my ankles against the needle's bent tip and kicked free. The guard recovered first, shoving Paolo so hard he hit the pillar and slid down with a moan. The man reached inside his coat. Gun. I did the only thing I had. I threw the heavy wooden chair. It caught him in the knees. He stumbled. I took the shears from the cutting table and held them the way my father taught me never to. Wrong, dangerous, desperate. The warehouse doors exploded inward. Gunfire ripped the air apart. Luca entered first, moving like a verdict. 2 men went down before I could track which shots were his. Nico limped in behind him with a pistol and an expression of deep personal insult, as though all kidnappings should have been rescheduled around his leg wound. Found them, he yelled, then ducked. Unfortunately mutual. Dante came through the smoke a breath later. People talk about rage as heat. They're wrong. The worst kind is cold enough to cut with. He saw the guard reaching for me and fired once. The man fell at my feet. Then Dante was in front of me, hands on my face, my shoulders, my blood-slick wrists, checking what was broken with such violent care I almost came apart from it. "I'm here," he said. It should have been obvious. It was, not to the part of me that had already imagined the room after he failed. "I know," I whispered and burst into tears so suddenly it embarrassed me. His forehead touched mine once, just once, amid the smoke and shouting and men still dying 20 feet away. Wordless, raw, enough. Then he turned, saw Paolo on the floor, and understood more than I had said. "What happened to Matteo?" I asked. "He's alive," Nico shouted from behind a rack of half-finished suits. "He's furious, medicated, and being unbearable to nurses already." My knees almost gave out with relief. A shot rang from the mezzanine above. Luca grunted and dropped behind a steel column, clutching his shoulder. Nico swore elaborate things about everyone's timing. Dante shoved me behind the cutting table and drew me down with him. "Stay, I hate that word." "I know." An almost smile touched his mouth and vanished under gunfire. Vittorio's voice drifted from the mezzanine, calm as a priest. "You came quickly." Dante leaned out, returned fire, and said nothing. "That is still your weakness," Vittorio called. "You noticed too hard." I looked up through the grid of metal stairs and caught a glimpse of him moving back from the railing, Stefano at his side. The traitor's face had gone gray. "Good." Dante's hand found mine under the table for one brief impossible second, squeezed once, then let go, restraint. Even here, I saw the table then, not just wood and scars, but pattern. The old garment warehouse had once been my father's workplace. Racks labeled by floor section, steam pipes, lift pulleys. The mezzanine platform ran over the finishing line, and beneath it hung the old fabric drop system for moving bolts downstairs. One severed cable could bring half the upper rail down. "Shears," I said. Dante looked at me. I pointed. "The pulley line above the stair support. If it drops, they lose the platform." He followed my gaze once and nodded, no disbelief. No patronizing pause, he just took the information and became deadly with it. "Luca," he called. "Seen it," Luca answered through his teeth. Nico frowned upward. "Please warn me before you destroy architecture. I am injured and emotionally delicate." Dante moved, Luca covered. Nico fired two messy but effective shots that kept Stefano pinned long enough for Dante to reach the old control brace by the pressing station. One round clipped the steel near his head. He didn't flinch. I did. He shot the lock pin clean through. The suspended rail screamed. Metal tore loose overhead. Vittorio cursed, stepping back as the fabric drop rig crashed across the mezzanine, taking half the railing and Stefano with it. He hit the lower floor badly and did not rise. Vittorio leaped the remaining gap and vanished through the rear office. "Go," Dante snapped to Luca, then to me. "With Nico." "I'm not Elena." The way he said my name stopped the argument inside it. Nico grabbed my elbow. "Come on, little almost dead bird. If you make me sprint on this leg, I'll haunt you." We stumbled toward the side exit while Luca pursued Vittorio and Dante followed like the dark consequence of an old sin. Outside, cold night air hit my lungs hard. Sirens far off, men shouting near the loading dock, red lights pulsing against brick. Nico got me into the SUV and slammed the door before leaning against it, breathing hard. His face had gone waxy. "You're bleeding," I said. He looked down at his leg bandage. "Still." "Rude." Despite everything, I laughed once, half hysterical. He smiled weakly. Rosa was in the back seat with a shotgun and a blanket. Of course she was. She wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, then cupped my bruised face with flower-scented hands as if I were still worth something clean. "You came back," she said. "I know." It was all I had. Dante emerged 5 minutes later alone. That told me Vittorio was still breathing. He got into the car, looked once at the cut on my wrist, the blanket, my face, and went very still. "We end this tonight," he said, and in his voice I heard what he was becoming for me. Not safer, worse than that, necessary. Vittorio ran to the old Bellini finishing house on the river, because men like him always believed the past was safest in places it had already burned. By the time we reached it, the sky above Brooklyn had turned the color of bruised steel. The building rose black against the water, 3 stories of cracked windows and rusted fire stairs. One corner still bore the scorch marks from 15 years ago. My father had died because of secrets hidden in cloth. Dante had lost his sister because he had trusted the wrong men with timing and orders. Vittorio had built a kingdom in the space that grief left behind. Of course it ended there. "You stay in the car," Dante said. I looked at him, really looked. The cut at his temple from the warehouse, the bandage under his shirt, the exhaustion he wore like another weapon. "No, Elena, you brought me into this the second you let me see it." My hands shook, but not enough to stop me opening the door. "And if Vittorio is using my father's work again, I'm useful." Luca, pale under the blood seeping through his shoulder dressing, gave Dante a grim sidelong glance. "She's right," Nico, propped against the hood with 2 guns and all the martyrdom of an injured saint, added. Also, if you lock her in the car, she'll probably stab someone with sewing equipment out of principle. Rosa crossed herself in the front seat. Go kill the correct people and come back breathing. There are moments a life separates into what it was and what it has chosen. Standing in the wet dark beside that ruined building, I felt the split cleanly. Dante looked at me for one long breath, then he nodded once. Inside, the finishing house smelled of river damp, ash sunk deep into brick and old fabric rot. My skin knew the place before my mind did. Narrow aisles, cutting tables, lift shafts. The ghosts of work, somewhere overhead a door slammed. Luca signaled left. Dante took center. I followed because if I stopped moving, the fear might have arranged itself into sense. We found Paolo first. He was tied to a support post in the pressing room, face swollen, one eye closing. When he saw me, he made a sound I had not heard since he was 12 and woke from nightmares after our father's funeral. I cut him loose. I'm sorry, he said immediately. Lena, I'm sorry, I know, I said because there was no time for a larger truth. Vittorio has men upstairs and Stefano is dead, Dante said. Paolo went white. I did not look at Dante when he said it. Something about the absolute quiet in his voice told me there had been no spectacle in it, only completion. We moved toward the freight stairs. Halfway up, gunfire broke from the office level. Luca shoved me flat as bullets chewed the railing. Dante returned fire with terrifying calm. Paolo curled behind a machine casing, sobbing into his hands. I hated him a little for it and loved him anyway. Some griefs never become noble. When the shooting stopped, Vittorio spoke from behind the glass office wall above us. Do you know the difference between us, Dante? Dante said nothing. Vittorio laughed softly. Neither do I. We reached the top floor in a rush of splintered wood and smoke. Vittorio's 2 remaining men fell fast, one to Luca, one to Dante. Then it was just us and him in the office where my father's ledgers had once been altered into weapons. He stood by the window with a pistol in one hand and a canister in the other. Accelerant. Of course, UD burn it again, I said. Vittorio's gaze shifted to me. Some buildings insist. Dante stepped forward. Put it down, like you put your order down and my plans went smoothly. Vittorio smiled, but his eyes had gone fever bright. You were made for this, Dante. The only difference is I stopped pretending regret was useful. There it was, the mirror held up in perfect, cruel light. Dante's face changed very slightly, not with anger. With recognition too painful to display. My sister died because I chose speed over certainty, he said. Vittorio spread one hand. And yet here you are, still choosing. He fired, glass shattered. Dante moved. So did I. The shot meant for him tore through the hanging coat forms behind us because I had grabbed his sleeve and yanked. Pain burst across my palm where fabric burned under my grip. Dante fired twice. Vittorio staggered but did not drop the canister. It hit the floor, split, and the office bloomed instantly with chemical stink. Fire licked up the curtains. Smoke thickened with terrifying speed. Out, Luca shouted, but Vittorio lunged anyway, not for the door, for Dante. Men do not always fight like in films. Sometimes they collide ugly and close and old as the dirt under history. Dante drove him into the desk. Vittorio laughed blood into his own teeth. I saw the pistol slide under the filing cabinet. And I saw something else. Vittorio's coat lining had torn in the struggle. Inside, stitched into the seam with bellflower anchors, was another packet, my father's hand, again. I don't know if instinct or inheritance moved me. I seized the office shears from the desk, slit the seam, and pulled the packet free just as Vittorio broke from Dante's hold and reached for the gun. Dante, he turned at the sound of my voice, fired first. Vittorio hit the scorched floor hard. For one beat, no one moved. Fire climbed the wallpaper. Smoke poured across the ceiling. Dante looked down at the man who had mirrored everything darkest in him and survived longer than he deserved. Then he bent, closed Vittorio's open eyes with 2 fingers, and stood. What did you take? He asked me. I held up the packet with shaking hands. Later it would prove everything. Stefano's payments, the original warehouse insurance fraud, names of men bought and buried. The final ledger line showing my father had tried to get Caterina out before the fire and died for it. Enough truth to ruin a kingdom, enough truth to wound the man I loved in exactly the place he had never healed, but that came after. In that moment, Dante caught my wrist and dragged me through smoke toward the stairwell while Luca hauled Paolo behind us, and the whole office turned orange. Outside, on the wet river pavement, the building burned against the dawn. Dante stood beside me breathing hard, ash on his face, blood on his sleeve, and watched the last of Vittorio Caruso's world collapse into fire. He did not look victorious. He looked changed. Then he took my shaking hand, saw the raw red mark where I had grabbed his jacket to pull him from the bullet's path, and bowed his head over it once like grief had finally learned another language. When he looked up, I knew it before he said it. It is over. After war, the world does not become peaceful, it becomes practical. There were funerals, though fewer than there could have been. Hospital rooms, lawyers, men suddenly eager to change loyalties now that the losing side was ash and paperwork. The packet from Vittorio's coat destroyed what remained of Stefano's old network, and cleared my father's name in every way that mattered to the dead and almost nowhere that mattered to the law. Dante buried Caterina properly in the family plot with a bellflower stitched into the lining of the black cloth over her casket. He did not ask how I knew to do it. He simply saw the mark and closed his eyes for one long second. Matteo lived. The bullet missed everything vital by an inch and his patience by less. Rosa recovered from the kitchen blast with a thin scar at her temple and twice the authority she already had. Nico milked his leg injury so shamelessly that even Luca threatened to shoot the other one for symmetry. I would never recover emotionally. Nico informed us from a chair in the kitchen, where he had somehow arranged 3 pillows, 1 blanket, and an illegal slice of almond cake. You haven't recovered emotionally from a pigeon, Rosa said. That animal knew what it did. The house laughed then, actually laughed, briefly, imperfectly, like people remembering their own mouths. It was the first sound of relief I trusted. I stayed, not because there was nowhere else to go. Florence remained possible. My aunt still wrote. The train station still existed. That was the point. I stayed because I had looked straight at what his world cost and walked back into it myself. That did not make the choice easy to live inside. Some nights I woke with the warehouse in my lungs. Some mornings I saw Dante at the end of the hall and loved him so abruptly it felt like falling badly. We had kissed only twice more since the chapel, once in the hospital corridor when Matteo woke and swore at us both. Once on the terrace after Caterina's burial when I was crying too quietly, and Dante kissed the tears before they reached my mouth. He still stopped, not because he did not want me, because he did. The restraint had become its own vow before either of us named it. 3 weeks after the fire, I was in the kitchen before dawn kneading bread because my hands needed work when the world was too loud. Flour dusted the counter. The silver thimble sat beside the bowl, bright in the low light. I had used it less as armor, now more as habit, memory softened by use. Dante walked in without a jacket, sleeves rolled, hair still damp from a shower. He paused in the doorway the way he always did, taking in exits, windows, me, especially me. You're up early, I said. You're covered in flour. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. I smiled despite myself. He came to the counter and looked down at the dough under my hands. Rosa says you've been reorganizing the pantry. She stores cinnamon like it's state gold. She's probably right. His fingers brushed the thimble on the counter and turned it once, catching the dent. The gesture struck me so hard I had to look away for a second. Same object, different weight. I kept meaning to ask, he said, why this? It was my mother's. I wiped flour on my apron. When I was little, I thought it made her invincible. Then she died of pneumonia, which was rude of her. A sound left him, not quite laughter, not far from it. When I'm afraid, I said more quietly, I touch it before I speak. It makes me feel like my hands belong to me. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached into the flour bin beside the bowl and drew something small from beneath the surface. A ring, not glittering, not theatrical. Old gold, worn smooth, with a tiny bellflower engraved inside the band where only the wearer would know. I stared. I found it in my mother's things after Caterina's burial, he said. It was meant to stay in the family for women who knew exactly what they were agreeing to. His voice went lower. I don't have anything innocent to offer you, Alina. No safe name, no clean future. If you take this, you take me with all the parts that do not get better because we want them to. My throat tightened so fast it hurt. He set the ring on the flour between us instead of reaching for my hand. Even now, choice before possession. Dante, you do not have to answer because I'm standing here. The tenderness of that nearly ruined me. I looked at the ring, at the flour. At the man who had learned to ask without pretending his love had not been built inside violence and restraint and unbearable care. Yes, I whispered. His breath left him slowly. Yes, what? He asked, because he was cruel in tiny, necessary ways. I laughed through the tears already arriving. Yes, I'll marry you. He still didn't touch me immediately. The space between us filled with everything we had survived. Then he picked up the ring, slid it onto my finger with a steadiness I knew cost him, and bent to kiss the inside of my wrist where the capture wound had healed pale. Little sparrow, he said. Warm now, entirely. That was the difference, not the words, what they carried. Later that morning, Nico saw the ring and clutched his chest. I leave for one bandage change and suddenly we are a household drama. Rosa smacked his shoulder with a dish towel. Matteo raised an eyebrow and told Dante marriage would not improve his bedside manner. Luca only nodded at me once, which from him felt nearly operatic. The house did not become ordinary after that. It became ours, and in that difference there was a kind of peace almost quiet enough to trust. 9 months later, the kitchen windows were open to late spring, not all the way. Dante still distrusted open sightlines on principle, but enough to let in the smell of basil from the courtyard planters and the soft city heat rising off stone. The marble under my bare feet held only a trace of the night's cool, bread browned in the oven. A radio murmured low from the pantry where Rosa pretended not to like music and always turned it on first. I was slicing pears for a tart when the tray came out hotter than I expected. I set it down too fast, catching the edge with my palm. The sting shot up my fingers. Before I could say anything, Dante was there. He had entered the kitchen so quietly I had not heard him, but I had learned his presence another way by then, cedar, cold metal from the watch at his wrist. That stillness that changed the temperature of a room before his body did. He took my hand. It was such a simple sentence, it still felt impossible inside me sometimes. Let me see, it's nothing. Alina, I turned my palm upward, there it was again. Not a bruise this time. A line of red from the tray, a little flower at the base of my thumb. The old silver thimble looped over my other finger because I had been mending a table runner between baking steps. But the motion was the same as the first night. Hurt offered like fact, not plea, truth before performance. His face changed with painful slowness. After all this time, it still did. I watched him notice it, really notice it, and because I knew him now, I knew what it cost him, not fear of my pain alone, love, memory. The exact shape of the first moment I unsettled him, still alive in his body. He lifted my hand to the cool lip of his water glass, pressing it gently there. You do that every time. Burn myself, tell the truth with your hands. The room went quiet around us. Outside the kitchen, life moved in the ordinary rhythms we had built and defended. Luca in the courtyard on a call. Matteo arriving for lunch he had not been invited to and would criticize anyway. Nico in the hallway arguing with a delivery man that no, he absolutely had not ordered 6 boxes of diet crackers and 4 cannoli. And yes, both could coexist in a balanced moral life. I smiled. That sounds dramatic. I married you. I lost the right to modest phrasing. I laughed softly. He took the thimble from my finger, rolled the dent beneath his thumb the way I had in a servant corridor months and lifetimes ago, then slid it back on with ridiculous care. Same gesture. Different meaning, no armor now, only home. The tart waiting on the counter had a sugar shell browned almost to bitterness, soft pear beneath, rosemary threaded through the cream. Not the same as the one I made in fear, close enough to feel like an answer. What is it called? He asked. I looked down at it, thought about saying something light, didn't. After, I said. His gaze lifted to mine. Because, he asked. Because it still tastes a little burned if you're honest, I said. But it's sweet anyway. He stared at me for one impossible second, and I knew then that love did not make us innocent, it made us witnesses. He bent and kissed me, not like a man stopping himself, not like a man taking, but like someone finally unafraid of gentleness where someone could see. Warm, settled. The kind of kiss that belongs in kitchens, not crises. From the doorway, Nico groaned theatrically. I would like everyone to remember there are civilians present. Rosa shoved past him with a basket of herbs. If you're civil, that will be your first offense. Matteo appeared behind them carrying wine and disapproval. The tart had better be good enough to justify this level of emotional display. It isn't for you, I said. Nico limped to the counter, peered at the pears, and put a hand over his heart. Rosemary. She's become powerful. Dante's hand settled at the back of my neck. Warm, possessive only in the oldest sense of the word, not ownership but chosen belonging. Sit, he told the room. They did. Even Nico, though he complained while obeying that no one respected his convalescence. There were plates to set, bread to cut, Matteo to argue with about salt, Rosa to overrule all of us. Ordinary things, radical things in a life like ours. Later, when the others had carried the dishes out, and the kitchen held only the hush after company, Dante came behind me as I stood at the sink and wrapped both arms around my waist. I leaned back into him, no fear in it now, not of him. Only the shadow we had chosen knowingly, the fact that the world outside these walls remained dangerous, that some costs do not reverse, that Caterina was still dead. Paolo still rebuilding himself in Boston under Luca's watch, and my father still beyond every answer I might have asked if he had lived. That was the unresolved thing, I think, not whether love survived darkness. It can, we were proof. The harder question was whether choosing love inside darkness changes what kind of person you are. I still do not know. Dante kissed the place below my ear and murmured, "Little Sparrow." The nickname settled over me like the gentlest claim I had ever consented to. I turned in his arms and touched the scar near his temple, then the ring on my finger, then the thimble between us catching the kitchen light. All the same hands, all the same truth. Would you have chosen Dante and let this darkness become your home? Have you ever loved someone enough to accept the part of them that would never be clean? If you have, then you know why I turned my palm upward the first time, and why I still do.